She smiled at him. That was all. In a room where 40 men had spent the last decade perfecting the art of looking anywhere else, she smiled at him. Directly, unguardedly. Like she simply did not know she was supposed to be afraid. Dante Salvator, Don, strategist, the man who had not flinched in 15 years, he flinched. Arya Conti was 26, a pastry chef with flour sometimes still on her wrist, and an unnerving habit of lighting a candle before she did anything else in any room. She had come to his world by accident, a wrong door, a favor for a friend, a night that was supposed to mean nothing. In 2 hours, she was inside his compound. In 2 days, she was inside his head. In 2 weeks, she would know the thing he had spent 15 years burying. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that the name she carried was a thread that led directly to the darkest room in his history. That smile. That completely unguarded, reckless, impossible smile. It would either save him, or it would destroy them both. Chapter 1, The Room That Goes Quiet. I didn't mean to be there. That's the thing I would repeat for weeks afterward, in the dark, in the quiet of a kitchen that felt too small. I did not mean to be there. It was Lena's fault, technically, though I would never say so to her face. She'd catered a private dinner for someone she refused to name, called me at 7 on a Thursday with flour on my voice and panic in hers, and said, "Arya, I need your lemon tarts in 45 minutes, or I will actually die." That was the whole explanation. That was all I had when I walked through a service entrance on North Lake Shore Drive, carrying 24 lemon tarts in a white box, wearing my second-best chef's coat, and ended up in the wrong corridor. The right corridor led to the catering kitchen. The wrong one led to a dining room the size of a cathedral. I pushed the door open before I realized, before I felt the shift in air pressure that I would later learn meant armed men, too many. Stop, and by the time I understood I was somewhere I should not be, I was already inside. 40 men, maybe more. Long table, heavy silver, candles not yet lit. And at the head of the table, a stillness so complete it functioned like a sound. Every person in that room looked at me. Then every person in that room looked away, down at their plates, at their hands, at the middle distance where powerful men practice staring when they do not want to appear rattled. Except him. He was looking at me directly, without apology, without the slight adjustment most people make when they realize they've been caught staring. Dark suit, no tie, jaw that looked like it had been decided rather than grown. His hands were flat on the table in front of him, perfectly still. He looked the way very old churches look, like something enormous had happened there, and the walls had never quite recovered. I did the thing I always do when I'm nervous. I smiled. Not a strategy. Not a performance. Just my face doing the only thing it knows how to do when I'm uncertain. My mother used to say I smiled the way other people flinched, automatically, helplessly, like a reflex. It was true. I smiled at the man at the head of the table the way you smile at someone you've known for years. He did not smile back, but he did not look away either. One of the men near the door, broad shoulders, silver at his temples, a face like a fist, stepped toward me. I held up the white box. "I'm catering, pastry." "I think I have the wrong room." "You do," the broad-shouldered man said. "Marco," one word from the head of the table. The broad-shouldered man stopped. Silence. The specific kind of silence that exists in rooms where everyone is waiting for a single person to decide something. "Bring them in." His voice was low. It did not rise to reach me, it simply arrived, the way temperature changes. "The candles aren't lit." I blinked. "I'm sorry, the candles," he said again, and his eyes moved just slightly to the unlit tapers along the center of the table. "They aren't lit." I looked at the candles. I looked at him. My hand was already in my coat pocket before I thought about it. I carry a lighter. I always carry a lighter. It's the first thing I learned in a professional kitchen. Never trust that someone else has handled the small things. I walked to the nearest candle and lit it. Then the next. Then the next. Working quietly down the length of the table, past men who had gone very still in a way that told me, distantly, that this was not normal. That that people did not simply walk through this room and do small domestic things. That whoever I was, whatever I'd stumbled into, the rules said I should be terrified. I finished the candles. I set my white box on the side table near the door. When I turned back to leave, he was still watching me, not with hunger, not with threat. With something I could only describe, later, as attention, the full weight of it, unmodified, landing on me like a hand on the shoulder. "Your name," he said. "Arya Conti." Then, because the silence was too complete and I was nervous, "The tarts have a lavender glaze." I wasn't sure if that was requested, but I thought it might work with the meal. One of the men near the wall made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. "Arya Conti," the man at the head of the table repeated. Not a question, not warmth, just the act of keeping it. "You light candles in rooms you've never been in before." "I light candles everywhere," I said. "Old habit. Bad lighting makes food taste worse. It's physiological." A pause. Something shifted in his face. Not a smile, not even close, but the faintest adjustment. Like a room where someone has opened a window in another part of the house, and you feel the change in air before you hear anything. "Marco will show you out," he said. That was it, that was all. I followed Marco, who turned out to be exactly as dangerous looking up close as he'd seemed from across the room, back through the corridor and into the service entrance. He handed me the empty white box at the door with an expression I couldn't read. "Don't come back," he said. "I wasn't planning to," I said. I drove home with the lighter in my hand, my heart doing something irregular and unexplained in my chest, telling myself it was just adrenaline, just the strangeness of the situation. Just a wrong door and a right exit and nothing else. I did not know his name yet. I did not know that he had already told 2 men to find out mine. From his perspective, 1 paragraph behind her eyes, she lit the candles. She walked the length of his table like she had done it 100 times. Like the room full of men who had watched other men disappear was simply a room that needed better lighting. And when she smiled, that first time, that unguarded reflex of a smile, something in his chest moved that had not moved in 15 years. He did not like it. He filed it carefully away in the part of himself he had learned never to open. She smiles at people she trusts. She smiled at me. And she does not know yet that trusting me is the most dangerous thing she has ever done. Chapter 2, Marco's diet and other disasters, the rules arrive. The defiance is immediate. The comedy relief enters. 3 days later, I had almost convinced myself it hadn't happened. Almost. The way you almost forget a song that keeps returning in the exact moment you've stopped expecting it. Lena had apologized 4 times and explained nothing. The dinner had been for a private client she could not name, and when I pushed, she looked at the table and said, "Arya, please don't push," in the tone she usually reserved for telling me I'd added too much salt. I let it go. I went back to my kitchen, to my 16-hour days and my sugar-dusted prep station, and the particular satisfaction of making something beautiful out of ingredients that had no opinion about anything. My world was small, and I loved it exactly for that. My pastry kitchen occupied the back half of a building on West Randolph, part of a larger restaurant I supplied exclusively. My workspace, 2 prep tables, a walk-in cooler, a convection oven I had named Gerald, and a window that faced a brick wall. I had the brick wall painted with a mural of a lemon grove by a student artist who charged me in croissants. It was the most beautiful thing I owned. I was elbow-deep in ganache on a Tuesday afternoon when the door opened. Not the service entrance. The front. I looked up. The broad-shouldered man, Marco, was standing in my kitchen doorway wearing a suit that cost more than my oven, holding a phone, and staring at the mural with an expression of profound personal offense. "What is that?" he said. "A lemon grove," I said. "Can I help you?" "A lemon grove," he repeated. He looked at me. He looked at the ganache. He looked at the mural again. "On a wall. Most murals are on walls, yes." He stepped inside. Behind him, 2 other men I had not noticed positioned themselves on either side of my door. Not entering, just existing, which was somehow more alarming. Marco placed his phone on my prep table and turned it to face me. On the screen was a document, not a legal document. A personal document, my home address, my business registration, my mother's name and her address in Naperville, and a small photograph of me walking out of a Whole Foods 3 days ago. I looked at the photograph. I looked at Marco. "He wants to know if you're a problem," Marco said, not unkindly, like a doctor delivering a diagnosis. "I brought lemon tarts," I said. "I don't think that qualifies. It's not the tarts he's thinking about." The room was very quiet. I was aware of the ganache cooling on my hands, of Gerald's low hum behind me, of the strange, suspended quality of a moment that is deciding something without asking your permission. "Who is he?" I asked. Marco looked at me for a long moment. "Dante Salvator," he said, like the name was a weather system, like it came with its own forecast. I knew the name. You could not live in Chicago and not know the name the way you knew certain intersections, by what had happened there. Not specifically, not documented. Just the weight of it in the city's particular silence on certain subjects. I said, "Tell him I'm not a problem. He'd prefer to tell you the rules himself." That stopped me. "The rules? He has a few." Marco reached into his jacket. I went very still and produced a business card. Plain, black, 1 number. "Tonight, 7 o'clock. You don't have to come." He set the card next to the ganache. "But he'd like you too." After he left, I stood in my kitchen for 4 full minutes holding the card. Then I called Lena. "Lena," I said. "Who is the private client?" A pause so long I could hear her breathing. "Arya, Lena, Dante Salvator." Her voice had gone very flat. I didn't know the dinner was through an agency. I swear I didn't know who. "What does he want with me?" "I don't know. I genuinely don't know." Another pause. "Are you going to go?" I looked at the business card. I looked at the lemon grove on my wall. I thought about the way he had said the candles aren't lit, like it was an observation about a problem that required solving, and the way he had watched me walk the length of his table, and the way. When I turned to leave, he had said my name, Arya Conti, like he was placing it somewhere he would not lose it. "Yes," I said. Lena made a sound like she was swallowing something difficult. "For the record, I think this is insane." "For the record," I said. "So do I." I arrived at the address on North Lake Shore Drive, the same building, different entrance, at 7:02. A man I hadn't seen before led me through corridors that smelled of wood smoke and something colder underneath. To a room that was not the dining room from 3 nights ago, but was furnished with the same quality of intention. Everything chosen, nothing accidental. Dante Salvator was standing at a window. No suit jacket, dress shirt, sleeves rolled twice, and I noticed, absurdly, that he was taller than I'd registered from across the table. Or maybe the dining room had been large enough to dilute him. This room was not large enough. He turned when I entered. No surprise. He had known exactly when I arrived. "You came," he said. "You said I didn't have to." "I did. That's not the same as saying I shouldn't." Something moved in his face, not a smile. That same window in another room shift. He gestured to a chair. I sat. He remained standing, which I understood immediately was not accidental, was in fact the whole arrangement of the conversation made spatial. "I don't know why you're here," I said. "I'm aware. So tell me." He looked at me with that unmodified attention that I was beginning to recognize as his resting state, not aggression, not seduction, just absolute presence. As if he had learned to be entirely in the moment, by excising everything that wasn't necessary. "You walked into my dining room," he said. "You lit the candles, you smiled at me." "I smile at everyone." "I know," he paused. "That's the problem." I didn't know what to say to that. I said nothing. His eyes moved to my hands, clasped in my lap, slightly too tight. "You'll be catering a series of dinners," he said. "Private, my household. I'm reassigning your current restaurant contract and compensating you appropriately." He named a number that made my next breath come with difficulty. "In exchange, you answer to me while you're in this building. You don't ask questions outside your work. You don't speak about what you see here. You don't contact anyone about the work unless I've approved the contact. Silence. And if I say no, I asked. You can say no. I studied him. He meant it. He was not threatening me. He was offering. In the way that people who have never needed to soften a request offer things. Directly, without apology, with an implicit understanding that the offer itself was already the accommodation. Why me? I asked. Specifically. He held my gaze for one beat longer than was comfortable. Because you lit the candles, he said, not an explanation. Something else entirely, something I tucked away in the back of my chest and would not examine for weeks. In the corridor on the way out, I passed Marco. He was leaning against a wall, holding his phone and eating what appeared to be a single rice cracker with the expression of a man attending his own funeral. Are you okay? I asked. I am on day 4 of a cleansing diet prescribed by a man who has never, in his professional life, experienced joy, he said. I am watching a woman I have known for 11 years eat a full plate of pasta in the kitchen every single night and not offer me any because she thinks my suffering is funny. He looked at the rice. Cracker. One day she will offer me pasta and I will tell her it is too late. I will have the satisfaction of watching her regret it for the remainder of her natural life. I blinked. Who is she? Gianna, he said. He said it the way a man says the name of a weather system. She is the housekeeper. She is 4'11". She is the bane of my existence. He looked at me. Are you taking the job? Yes, I said. He nodded slowly. Then God help you, he said. And me, God help us both. He ate the rice cracker. He winced. I left. And in the car, hands quiet on the wheel, I noticed I was already thinking about what I would make for his first dinner. Chapter 3, The Shape of Empire, The Edges of His World. Her skill announced. The first threat enters quietly. His household was organized the way I imagined a military operation was organized, with a logic so complete it had become invisible. No one explained the rules to me. The rules simply existed in the way gravity exists. You discovered them by moving through space and feeling where the resistance was. I was permitted in the kitchen between 6 a.m. and 9 p.m. I was not permitted on the 3rd floor. I was not to speak to the men stationed in the East Corridor. I was to leave before midnight on days when certain cars were parked in the rear garage. These were not written down. They were communicated through Sal, Dante's head of security, 55, with the face of a man who had stood very still in many dangerous rooms and survived all of them. He told me these things in the tone he probably used to brief new personnel. Matter of fact, thorough, without intimidation. And then, on my 3rd morning, before he left me alone in the kitchen, he stopped in the doorway. You're not afraid of him, he said, not a question. I don't know him well enough to be afraid of him, I said. Sal considered this. Most people are afraid before they know him. He paused. You might want to revise your approach before that changes. He left. I started on the morning pastries. The kitchen was extraordinary. Professional grade, spacious. With natural light I had not expected, and a pantry that stocked things I had not asked for but somehow needed, as if someone had studied how I cooked and prepared for it in advance. I found out later from Gianna that Sal had retrieved my supply invoices from the restaurant and matched them. I found out even later that Sal had done it on Dante's instruction. Gianna was 47, small as Marco had promised, with the kind of quiet authority that lives in people who have kept a powerful household running for decades. She showed me where everything was on that first morning, offered me espresso, and said, He eats at 7:30, 12:30, and 8. He does not finish meals he doesn't enjoy, and he finishes everything you've made so far. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me. She looked at me with eyes that were measuring something. Just don't cause problems. I said I wouldn't. I meant it. The work itself settled me in a way I hadn't expected. A kitchen is a kitchen is a kitchen. Even inside a world I didn't fully understand, the logic of heat and sugar and time remained constant. I fell into the rhythm of it. Breakfast pastries in the morning, small preparations through the afternoon, the larger dinner service in the evening. I cooked alone, mostly. Sometimes, one of the household staff would pass through for coffee or a task. Occasionally, distantly, I would hear the specific quality of silence that preceded Dante entering a room, a change in barometric pressure, almost the way the house rearranged itself around him. I noticed too many things about him. That was the problem I had named by day 5 and refused to solve. I noticed the way he took his coffee, no sugar, slight pause before the first sip, like he was deciding something. I noticed that he read physical newspapers, 3 of them, at the kitchen island at 7:30, and that he folded each one before moving to the next with a precision that suggested he had been doing it since he was young. I noticed that his hands were still, always still. Even in conversation, even when something landed that was clearly not what he wanted to hear, his hands stayed perfectly, deliberately still. I noticed where his hands were. I noticed that I was noticing. I told myself it was occupational. I read people through what they ate, through the small physical habits that told me more than conversation. I was a professional. This was observation. I was lying to myself, and I knew it, and I lit the candle on my prep station anyway, first thing every morning. And didn't examine why it had become important that there was one point of warm light in the kitchen at all times. My skill announced itself on day 8, without ceremony. I made a dessert I didn't plan to make. It happened the way the best things in a kitchen happen, out of instinct and available ingredients, and some wordless internal pressure I couldn't locate. I had watched Dante at dinner the night before. He had come to the kitchen to speak to Sal about something, had paused, had looked at the plate I'd prepared, and had said nothing. Just taken it and left. But I had seen his face for 1/2 second before he turned, and I had seen, not sadness, not exactly, something older than sadness. Something that had been lived with for so long it had become structural. I made him a dessert of dark chocolate ganache over a layer of preserved cherries, set in a thin almond shell. Sweet on first contact. The cherries slightly fermented, tart, with a bite that came after the initial sweetness like a second thought. The shell would crack under pressure, and the bitterness would come through when you least expected it. I left it on the kitchen island with no note. The next morning the dish was clean and in the drying rack. Sal found me at 7. He wants to know what you called it. I thought for a moment. Memory, I said. Sal nodded once and left. The threat arrived on day 10, so quietly I almost missed it. I was leaving through the service entrance at 9:15 when a car I didn't recognize was idling at the end of the service lane. It left before I reached my own car. I mentioned it to Sal the next morning without knowing exactly why, some animal instinct, the car sitting wrong in the particular way wrong things sit. Sal's expression did not change, but he wrote something down. That afternoon, 2 additional men appeared in the east corridor. And that evening, at 7:30, Dante came to the kitchen for his breakfast papers, and before he unfolded the first newspaper, he looked at me across the island. "You're observant," he said. "Occupational," I said. He looked at my hands, at the candle burning on the corner of the prep station. At some middle distance between us, where something was taking shape that neither of us had named yet. "Good," he said, just that. He unfolded the newspaper. And I went back to work, my heartbeat slightly uneven, the kitchen warm with morning light and the small flame I had lit before anything else. Someone was watching this house. I didn't know yet that they were watching me specifically. I didn't know yet that the name I carried, Conti, was already connected to something Dante, Salvatore, had spent 15 years trying to put behind him. Chapter 4, What Scars Look Like When You're Not Supposed to See Them, First Touch. His past in a reaction, Marco's second comedy moment. Tenderness inside a violent world. He was already in the kitchen when I arrived on the 14th morning. That had not happened before. The house had its own internal logic about territory. Certain spaces were his at certain hours, and certain spaces were mine, and the kitchen between 6 and 8 was mine. I had come to rely on that. I had come to rely on a lot of small things without naming them. He was standing at the island with a coffee he had made himself, reading something on his phone with the expression he wore when the news was bad, and he had already decided what to do about it. He looked up when I entered. No apology for being in my space, no explanation. "Good morning," I said. "There's a problem," he said, not good morning, not the social formula, just there's a problem. I set down my bag, took my apron from the hook and said, "Tell me." He looked at me. "You're not alarmed." "I'm curious," I said. "Alarmed comes after." That window shift again. He set the phone down. "The car you flagged," he said. "It was back last night and it wasn't empty." I tied my apron. My hands were steady. This surprised me, not the steadiness itself, but the fact that I was surprised by it, as if some part of me had expected to fall apart and hadn't yet. "Who?" I asked. "Someone trying to establish your routine." He watched my face. "Do you know anyone with reason to watch you?" "No," I said, honestly. I was a pastry chef with a mural on my kitchen wall. My life did not generate watchers. "Then the interest is in you being here," he said. "In access." I understood. I was the softest point on his perimeter. I came and went. I did not have guards. I was, to someone looking for a way in, a door left unlocked. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. "Stay," one word. But the weight of it was strange. Not an instruction, not a demand. Something more careful than either. Stay as in, not go home. Stay in the house until I understand the scope. The room I was given was on the second floor, which meant passing the east corridor every time I moved between it and the kitchen. I learned quickly that the men stationed there did not speak, but would step aside if you approached and hold doors if your hands were full, which meant they had been instructed to treat me with something. Not deference, something more pragmatic. Consideration, maybe. The consideration you extend to something that belongs to the household. I was not sure how I felt about that. On the second night, I heard something from the corridor below my room. Not argument, quieter than argument. The specific, controlled quality of a voice delivering bad news, and another voice receiving it without breaking. And then a silence that lasted long enough to tell me the bad news had been significant. In the morning, I found Dante in the kitchen again. He had a cut along his left forearm, shallow, already cleaned, but visible where his sleeve was pushed back. He was making coffee with complete concentration, as if the cut did not exist. I went to my prep station. I lit the candle. I started the morning pastries. After 4 minutes of companionable, professionally neutral silence, I said, without looking up, because looking up felt like the wrong move, "There's a first aid kit in the second pantry cabinet." "Left side. I'm aware. I'm just noting its location. I cleaned it. I can see that." Pause. "I also have arnica cream in my kit if the bruising gets visible." A silence. Different from his usual silences, this one had a slightly jagged edge. "Where did you learn field care?" he asked. "I grew up with a mother who believed a well-stocked first aid kit was a moral position," I said. "We didn't have much, but we had every kind of bandage." I paused. "She also believed candles made everything better. Hence," I gestured at the one burning on the corner of my station. He looked at the candle. Something in his posture changed, almost imperceptibly. A fraction of something releasing. "My mother lit a candle every night before dinner," he said. It was the most personal thing he had said to me in 2 weeks. He said it the way you say something before you can decide not to. I did not make a thing of it. I didn't turn around. I just said, "Mine too." And we worked in silence in the kitchen for another hour, the candle burning between us, and it was the closest thing to ease I had felt since walking through the wrong door. At noon, Marco arrived in my kitchen eating a single lettuce leaf with the expression of a man filing a formal complaint with the universe. "Gianna made carbonara," he said, "from scratch. With real guanciale, do you understand? From scratch. She made it at 11:30 in the morning for absolutely no reason, left it on the stove to stay warm, and then told me it was for a guest who is no longer coming." He sat heavily on the stool by the counter. There is no guest. There was never a guest. She did this for reasons that live exclusively in the darkest part of whatever she uses instead of a heart. I put a small plate of almond biscotti in front of him. He looked at it. Are these on the diet? Technically no. He ate 4 in a row. You, he said, are a good person. The carbonara thing might be accidental, I offered. Nothing Gianna does is accidental, he said with great conviction. She is a strategist. She has been waging psychological warfare on my caloric intake since the 14th of February, which was also the day I told her she looked particularly well in the blue dress, and she said, Marco, I look the same in every dress, you are simply not observant. He picked up a 5th biscotti. One day I will be observant, Arya. One day I will see her in every dress and I will say nothing, and she will have to live with the uncertainty. That's your plan, I said. Silence. It is a masterwork of emotional warfare, he said. I've been refining it for 8 months. He paused. It's possible I have already blinked several times. But the core strategy remains. He finished the biscotti. He stood. He straightened his very expensive jacket with the dignity of a man who had not just eaten 5 things that were not on his diet. He watches the candle, he said without changing his tone. Almost casually, I looked up. When you're not looking, Marco said, he watches the candle. I thought you should know. He walked toward the door. Also, do not ever, under any circumstances, tell Gianna I said that. He left. I looked at the candle burning on the corner of my station. I did not turn around, but I noticed that my hand, which had been very steady all morning, was not quite steady anymore. Chapter 5. What the world forces open, I found out about my father on a Wednesday. Not dramatically. Not with the weight the discovery deserved. It came in an email, which is the most undignified vehicle for a revelation that restructures everything you have ever believed about your own history. The email was from a lawyer, not mine, not one I'd contacted, but a name I didn't recognize representing an estate I hadn't known existed. My father, Giulio Conti, had died 4 years ago. I had been told he left when I was 3 and never looked back. What the lawyer's email said was different. My father had left a letter in his estate documents to be forwarded to me upon his death, and the letter, attached, 3 pages, handwritten. Scanned, said that he had not left. He had been removed by people who convinced my mother it was safer if she believed he'd gone willingly, by people who worked for a family whose name I now recognized. The letter did not say Dante's name. It said the Salvator family. I sat in my room on the 2nd floor of Dante Salvator's house, holding my phone, reading a 3-page letter from a father I'd never known, and understood slowly, with the particular nausea of a very large thing falling into place, that the accident that brought me through the wrong door had not been entirely an accident. Or if it had been, if the universe was that casually cruel, then the joke was on me. I did not cry. I sat with it the way you sit with a very cold thing, letting your body adjust to the temperature before deciding what to do. Then I went downstairs and made dinner. This is the thing about a kitchen. It does not care what has happened to you. The chemistry of heat and sugar and fat continues regardless. Butter emulsifies, chocolate tempers, dough rises. The physics of food has no opinion about your father. I made the most complicated thing I knew how to make. Not because the difficulty helped, though it did, but because I had learned, somewhere in the years of working in professional kitchens, that precision was the best container for feeling too much. I made a dessert that took 4 hours and required my full attention. A layered tart with a base of bitter almond, a middle of poached pear and cardamom, and a surface of caramelized honey, so thin it was translucent. 3 layers, each one beautiful alone, each one incomplete without the others. I was still working at 10 o'clock when Dante came through. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at the kitchen, at the organized complexity of it, the multiple stages of something in progress. The particular quality of concentration I knew was visible on my face when I was working this way. You're still here, he said. I live here, I said. Temporarily. He came further in. He looked at the tart in progress. He said nothing. I found out something today, I said. I don't know why I said it. The kitchen was warm and the candle was burning, and he was standing very still in the way he stood still when he had decided to stay. And I said it because the silence between us had, over the past 2 weeks, developed the quality of something that could hold weight. About my father. I kept working. The honey needed constant attention. He didn't leave. He was pushed out by people who decided it was more convenient. A pause. When did you find this out? About 3 hours ago. Silence. The honey was exactly the right temperature. I'm sorry, he said, and I believed him. That was the strange thing. I believed him completely, without analysis, the way you believe a temperature reading, not the performance of sympathy. Something quieter and more real. The people who pushed him out, I said. My hands were steady. I was proud of them for being steady. They were connected to a family with some history in this city. Another pause, longer. Arya, I'm not accusing you of anything, I said. My voice was level. I'm telling you what I found out. Because we have an arrangement, and you told me to tell you things that were relevant, and my voice faltered for exactly 1 beat. I thought this was relevant. He came to stand at the end of the island, not across from me, beside me, close enough that I could see the stillness in his hands and what it cost him. What family, he said. The letter didn't say a first name. I looked up at him. It said Salvador. His face did not change, but his hands, those perfectly controlled, always still hands, moved. Just slightly, a shift of weight. And I understood, in the same way I understood food instinctively, without requiring the information to be stated, that he already knew this. Or that he knew something adjacent to it that he had not told me. You knew, I said. I knew your name had a connection to something old, he said. I didn't know the specifics until recently. How recently? A pause. 4 days ago. 4 days. He had known for 4 days and had not told me. He had let me stay in his house, eat at his table, light candles in his kitchen, and he had known. I set down my pastry brush. I turned off the heat under the honey. I need to think, I said. I know. I'm not going to do something dramatic. I just need to think. I know. He didn't move, didn't apologize, didn't explain, didn't fill the silence with justification. He just stayed, present, patient, waiting for me to be ready and not trying to accelerate it. I stood at my station for a long moment. The candle burned, the honey cooled. My skill, I said finally. Reading people through food, I know what I made tonight without knowing I was making it. He looked at the tart. 3 layers, I said, bitter underneath. Sweet and complex in the middle, something very thin and very fragile on top that looks strong. I paused. That's me, I think. In case you were wondering. Something moved in his face then that I had not seen before, not the window in another room shift, something more exposed than that, something that cost him. I know, he said very quietly. I went to bed. I lay in the dark thinking about a father I'd never known, and a man I could not stop thinking about despite every reason I should have been able to stop. The dangerous thing was that I wasn't afraid of him. I was beginning to be afraid of that. Chapter 6 claimed it happened on a Friday. I had been in the house for 21 days. I had developed a routine with the particular density that routines develop when the world outside has contracted. The kitchen at 6, breakfast by 7:30. The specific quality of morning light on the prep station, the candle, the papers. The occasional footfall in the corridor above that told me he was already awake and moving and thinking about things I was not permitted to know. I had been thinking about my father. I had been thinking about what Dante had known and when. I had been cycling through the 2 facts in a figure 8, not landing on anything, not resolving it, just letting the motion of it tire me out. I was not ready to be angry. I was not ready to forgive. I was somewhere in the particular purgatory that exists between those 2 states and has no good name. The kitchen was mine that morning. Gianna was upstairs. Sal was in the east corridor. The house was in its daytime configuration, which meant reduced personnel because nothing important was scheduled, and Dante had told me, the evening before, that he had a meeting off-site at 10. He left at 9:50. At 10:15, all the windows on the east side of the house blew in at once. I was at the prep station when it happened. The concussive pressure of it knocked me into the counter, and for several seconds I simply couldn't locate myself, couldn't find up or the floor or the sound, which had stopped in that total way sound stops, after a large noise, takes all the available space. Then my hearing came back, shouting, running, and under it, the terrible organized quality of men moving toward a building they had just attacked. Sal was in the kitchen in 45 seconds. He had blood above one eye, and an expression completely stripped of everything but function. "Move," he said, and I moved through the kitchen, through a corridor I had never been in, through a door in a wall I had not known was a door, and into a stairway that went down. The safe room was underground, concrete, reinforced with ventilation and a phone and a door that locked from the inside with a sound like something final. Sal put me inside. "Stay," he said. "Where is? He's coming." Sal looked at me with an expression that was, underneath the professional competence, something almost parental. "Lock it when I go." I locked it. I sat on the floor with my back against the door in the dark. There was a light switch, but I didn't reach for it, some instinct keeping me small and still, and I thought. In the irrational way that the mind produces thoughts under pressure, about the candle burning in the kitchen, and whether it would set something on fire if it tipped, and whether I had turned off Gerald. 23 minutes. That is how long I sat on the floor before the code came through the door's panel, 3 short, 1 long, which Sal had told me to listen for, and then the door opened. Dante. He was not unharmed. His suit jacket was gone. There was a cut along his jaw, and his shirt had a dark stain at the shoulder that I identified with the particular cold clarity of shock as blood. He came into the room with a controlled urgency that had an entirely different quality from his usual control, not the stillness of a man at rest, but the compressed precision of a man who had just done something he was very good at, and had not slowed down enough yet for his body to know it was over. He looked at me, 1 full second where he looked at me, and every piece of that controlled professional surface showed its seam, just briefly, just fractionally. His jaw moved. His hands, which had been loose at his sides, closed once and then opened. "You're not hurt," he said, almost like a question. "No," I said. He crossed the room. He sat on the floor, directly, without hesitation, like his legs had decided before he had. And for a moment we were at eye level, which had not happened before. And the absence of his usual vertical authority made him look, for one unguarded instant, like someone who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time, and had simply needed to put it down. "I should have had you out of the house," he said. "You didn't know. I should have known." "Dante," he looked at me, his first name in my voice. I had not said it before. His expression shifted, something that was not quite surprise, because I did not think he was often surprised by anything, but something adjacent to it, something that registered. "I'm not hurt," I said again, more gently. "I'm here, I'm fine." His hand moved. It found my wrist, not grabbing, not tight, just his fingers wrapped around the inside of my wrist where the pulse was fastest. And he held it there with the same deliberate stillness he brought to everything, and I understood that he was counting my heartbeat. That this was how he was confirming what his eyes told him. I let him. We sat like that for what might have been 2 minutes. Then he said, "You smiled at me." "What?" "The first night." His thumb moved slightly against my wrist, not a caress, something more unconscious. "Every person in that room looked away when I walked in. You've seen how men react to me. You know what I am in a room." He paused. "You smiled, like you were glad to see me. Like I was just a person." His voice was very even. "I have not been just a person to anyone in 15 years. The silence was different from all his other silences. "That's why," he said. Not an explanation, an admission. I said nothing. There was nothing to say that would not diminish it. "Little Light," he said, and the nickname was different this time. Still quiet. still careful. But less like an observation and more like something he had started to mean. You walked into the darkest room I own and lit the candles. My eyes were burning. I refused to cry. I held very still and let the warmth of his hand on my wrist be what it was. "There's going to be a war," he said. "I know, you should be afraid of that. I know, you're not. I'm afraid of other things," I said. He looked at me, his thumb stilled on my wrist. We were very close, in the small, warm concrete room, and the air between us had changed the way air changes when weather is coming, a pressure shift, a held breath. Something that could not be undone. He did not kiss me. He let go of my wrist with the same deliberate care with which he'd taken it. "The war arrived," he said. "I need to know you're still choosing to be here." I thought about my father, about the letter, about 3 layers of a tart I'd made without knowing what I was saying. "I'm still here," I said. He stood, he offered me his hand. I took it. War had arrived, and I was still in his house. Chapter 7, the cost of being close to him, all-out war. Lena is hurt. Arya's life threatened. The real exit point. Lena called me on a Tuesday at 3 in the afternoon and said, "Arya, I need you to not panic," which meant panic. She was in Northwestern Memorial. She had been in a car accident the night before, rear-ended at a red light. Her car pushed into the intersection. A fractured wrist and 3 cracked ribs, and a concussion that had kept her unconscious for 4 hours. The car that hit her had not stopped. The plates, she told me in a voice that was steady and furious in equal measure, had come back as stolen. I said her name several times. I asked if she was okay. I asked if she needed anything. I said I would come. She said, "Arya, it wasn't an accident." The silence between us was shaped. "They came to my apartment first," she said. "I wasn't home. I think I was supposed to be, and I wasn't, and they followed me instead when I came back." A pause. "I don't know what you've gotten into. I don't know who he is to you. But this is what his world costs. I need you to know that." I thanked her. I told her I would come as soon as I could. I told her I would explain everything. I hung up and sat with the phone in my lap until the feeling of it, the specific weight of what had just happened to my best friend, had settled enough for me to stand. Sal drove me to the hospital. 2 men I recognized, as Dante's followed in a separate car. I sat in the back seat and watched the city through the window, the ordinary city, the city where people moved and ate and argued and drove to hospitals, and thought about what Lena had said. This is what his world costs. She was right. She was exactly right. Lena had nothing to do with any of this. Lena had come through a service entrance with her catering company and had made a wrong connection, and had, for no reason except proximity to me, ended up in a hospital bed with cracked ribs. That was the bill. That was what it looked like, the cost itemized. Lena was awake when I arrived. Small and furious in a hospital bed, her wrist in a brace, her left eye bruised from the impact. She grabbed my hand with her good one and said, "Okay, tell me everything, start from the candle." I told her everything. The wrong door, the dinner, Marco and his rice crackers, the car in the service lane, the safe room, the letter about my father, the safe room again and Dante's hand on my wrist and what he had said. I told her all of it in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and institutional food, and Lena listened without interrupting, which was not her natural state. Which meant she understood the gravity. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "The letter," she said. "You believe it?" "Yes. And him, you believe he didn't know about you specifically when this started?" "Yes. And you're still in his house?" "Yes." She looked at me with the expression she wore when she had something difficult to say and was deciding whether to say it with kindness or efficiency. She chose efficiency. "You can leave, Arya, right now. I have a cousin in Portland who will put you up for literally as long as you need. You have a skill that travels. You could be gone by Thursday and build something entirely new, and he would." She paused. "He would let you go. I think he would let you go." I held her hand. The hospital was quiet around us. "I know," I said. "That's not an answer." "I know that too." She searched my face. What are you afraid of? Nothing, I said, and then, with more honesty, everything. But not him. She squeezed my hand. She leaned back against the pillow and looked at the ceiling and said, Arya, I've known you for 11 years. You are the most careful person I've ever met. You don't do anything without a reason. She paused. What's the reason? I thought about his hand on my wrist in the dark. About the specific quality of his face in the safe room, not the controlled professional face, but the one underneath it. Which was a face that had been waiting for a very long time to put something down. About the way he said little light and what it had started to cost him. Because I think he's alone in a way that has nothing to do with how many people are in his house, I said. And I don't think I can leave that, Lena sighed. That is the most romantic and the most catastrophically dangerous sentence you have ever said to me. I know. I'm going to need you to promise me that if this goes wrong, it might go wrong, I said. I know. Promise me you'll come to Portland. I promise I'll come to Portland. She looked at me for a long moment. Then, okay, I believe you. Another pause. Now tell the man who had my accident investigated before I even reported it that I want the name of whoever did this. I went back, not because I was trapped. Not because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't. I drove myself, without Sal, in my own car. And I parked in the service lot, and I went through the side entrance, and I found Dante in the east corridor in conversation with two men who went very still when I arrived. He looked at me. Lena is going to be okay, I said, and I'm back. The two men found reasons to be elsewhere. You didn't have to come back, he said. I know. He held my gaze. Something in him, some particular tension, the kind that lives in the shoulders of someone waiting for news, released. Not visibly, just fractionally, just enough for me to know it had been there. I made my choice with open eyes, I said. I want you to know that, not trapped, not afraid, open eyes. He nodded once. Now, I said, tell me who gave the order. His expression changed. Arya, tell me who gave the order. Because whoever hurt Lena was trying to send me a message about staying here, and I would like to be fully informed about exactly what I've chosen to stay inside of. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said the name, Enzo Ferrara. And I understood, from the way he said it, the specific weight of an old name, that this was not simply an enemy. This was something more complicated than an enemy. I filed it away. I went to the kitchen. I lit the candle. I was still here. Chapter 8, the darkest room, lowest point. She is taken. She does not break. The traitor revealed. They took me on a Thursday morning. Not dramatically. Not with the violence of the East Wing attack. It was quieter than that, which somehow made it worse, the particular horror of a wrong thing happening in an ordinary moment. I was outside, in the rear garden, which I had been permitted to use in the mornings for the past week. Sal knew. It was cleared. The garden was enclosed and monitored. It was one of the things that had made the house feel less like a compound. Two men over the rear wall, one chemical-soaked cloth, and then nothing for a period I couldn't measure. I woke in a room that was ordinary in a way designed to disorient. Not a dungeon, not theatrical. An empty room with a chair, a window with the light filtered but present, and the specific quality of absolute stillness that live spaces have when they are waiting. My hands were not bound. I noted this. I noted the window, second floor, angled, not an exit. I noted the door locked, solid. I noted what I felt, which was afraid, cold, and underneath both of those, a clarity that surprised me with its steadiness. I was not going to beg, that much I knew. The man who came in after an hour was Enzo Ferrara. He looked like what he was, someone's grandfather, if that grandfather had spent 60 years making very precise and very terrible decisions. Silver-haired, well-dressed, with hands that were gentlemanly and a voice that was, when he spoke, entirely without threat, which made the threat worse. Miss Conti, he said. I've been wanting to meet you. I wish I could say the same, I said. He smiled. It was a genuine smile, which was the most unsettling thing about it. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Something frightened. He sat in the other chair. There were 2 chairs, which meant this had been arranged for conversation. He collects frightened people. Frightened people are useful. Frightened people stay. I'm not staying because I'm frightened, I said. I know. He looked at me with something that was, from a 60-year-old man who had just had me abducted, disturbingly close to respect. That's the problem. Frightened people I can account for. He paused. You've changed his calculus. I can't afford that. Then let me go, I said. I'll leave Chicago. You won't, he said, simply, like a weather forecast. I've watched you for 3 weeks. You went back to his house voluntarily after your friend was put in the hospital. You lit a candle in a room full of armed men and smiled at the most dangerous person in it. He tilted his head. You don't have a leaving gear, Miss Conti. I held his gaze. My name was your leverage, I said. You thought I was already his, that you could use me for access. You are already his, he said. He simply hasn't admitted it yet. He left me alone for several hours. Long enough for my fear to do its full circuit and come back smaller, not gone, but familiar now, no longer the sprawling unknown thing. I thought about what I knew. I thought about what I had. I had my phone, they had taken it. I had the room. I had the window and what was beyond it. I had my mind, and I had something else. I had been noticing, for 3 weeks, which people in Dante's house moved with the specific relaxed confidence of someone in a space they trusted. I had been noticing because I noticed bodies the way I noticed food, what ease looked like, what tension looked like, what deception looked like when it inhabited a person. One of the 2 men who had brought me here had been in Dante's East Corridor for the past week. He had not looked relaxed there. He had looked like someone counting down. I had registered it and not followed it, the way you register a smell in a kitchen that doesn't belong and tell yourself you'll check the ingredient list later. I filed that information. I held it. I waited. Gianna found the secondary phone. That was how Dante came for me, not through force of arms, though there was that too, eventually. Gianna, who had worked in that household for 16 years, and who knew every person in it the way a doctor knows a patient, had noticed the same thing I'd noticed. She had found a second phone in the East Corridor. She had told Sal at 7 in the morning. By noon, the traitor, a man named Caruso who had been with Dante for 4 years, and who had, it would come out later, 2 younger siblings whose debts Ferrara had purchased, was identified and contained. By 2 o'clock, they knew where I was. He came in person. I heard the building change before I heard anything specific, the particular quality of a space that knows something is coming. Voices gone quiet. Movement that was too purposeful to be ordinary. The door opened. Dante came in first, which I understood immediately was a choice. He had come first, before Sal, before anyone else. Because there was something about walking through that door that he had needed to do himself. He looked at me across the room with the same look from the safe room, multiplied. Something raw and barely contained and completely stripped of the professional surface. You're not hurt, he said. The same words, different weight entirely. No, I said, same answer, same truth. He crossed the room. He did not stop at the careful professional distance he maintained. He came close, closer than he had ever come without the mediation of a shared task. And he put his hands on either side of my face, not roughly, with extraordinary gentleness. And he looked at me in a way that was not investigation or verification, but something nakeder than either. I should never have let you go outside alone, he said. It wasn't your fault. Arya, it wasn't. His hands were warm, the room was cold. My whole body had been cold for hours, and the warmth of his hands it was too much, almost, too specific, too real. Ferrara told me you don't have a leaving gear, I said. Something moved through his expression. He might be right, I said very quietly. He said nothing, but his hands stayed. And that was its own answer, in the language the 2 of us had been speaking for 3 weeks. Which was the language of proximity and restraint, and everything said in the space between saying things. He was changed by what he'd had to become to get here. I could see it in him, and he knew I could see it, and neither of us flinched. I was going to have to decide whether to stay knowing what it would keep costing. We both already knew which way it would go. Chapter 9, What He Becomes for Her, The Rescue Aftermath. Raw reunion. Her own strength, the final villain steps forward. I survived through my own will. I want to name that clearly, because in the days and weeks after, there would be a version of the story that made me the object of it. The thing carried out. The thing retrieved, and that was not the true version. The true version was that I sat in a cold room for 6 hours and did not break, not once, and I found the thing in myself that I had not known was there. A quality of stillness that was not passive but active, not fear management but genuine steadiness. The kind that comes from being certain of something at the center, even when everything around it is wrong. I was certain of him. That was the thing I had found. I had spent 3 weeks in his world, watching him be careful and controlled, and sometimes violent and always, underneath all of it. Someone who had decided long ago that the cost of his world would be paid by himself alone. And somewhere in those 3 weeks, in the kitchen, over the candle, in the safe room on the floor, I had decided that I did not want him to pay it alone anymore. That was the thing in the center. That was what I held on to. He drove me home himself. Not to the compound, to a secondary location, one of several he maintained, a smaller house in Lincoln Park that smelled of old wood and fireplace smoke, and something cleaner than the main compound. Sal met us there. Marco was already inside, eating something I recognized as Gianna's cooking from a container with the expression of a man who had been saving his caloric allowance for a crisis and had timed it correctly. He looked up when I walked in. He looked at me for a long moment, at my face, at my posture, at whatever it was that people read in someone who has been through something and come out the other side. "Dear God," he said softly, and it was so entirely without his usual comedy that it stopped me. "She's fine, Marco," Sal said. "She's fine." Marco nodded. He put down the container. He said to me, "There is more food. Sit." I sat. Dante had not come in yet. He was outside with Sal, speaking in low voices. I could see them through the window, 2 men in a conversation that had the shape of a decision being made. "He hasn't slept," Marco said, appearing beside me with a plate I had not asked for. "In case you're wondering, since the moment you went missing, he has been," he paused, searching for the word, "activated in a way that I have not seen since." He stopped. He set the plate down. "Just he hasn't slept." I looked at the plate. Pasta, real pasta, which meant Marco had called Gianna. "Did you call Gianna?" I asked. "I did not call Gianna," Marco said with enormous dignity. "She called me. She heard what happened and she called me and she said, 'Marco, make sure that girl eats.' And I said, 'Gianna, I am not her keeper.' And she said, 'Marco,' and I said, 'I will make sure she eats.'" He pulled his phone from his pocket and looked at it. "She has not called back to check. This is a test." He put the phone away. "I am not passing or failing this test. I am simply feeding the woman. The result is the same." I ate some pasta. It was extraordinary. I told him so. "Tell Gianna," he said. "Not me." He paused. "Actually tell me and I will tell Gianna I made it." Dante came in at 10 o'clock. The smaller house had a room off the main corridor. Not an office, not quite a sitting room. Just a space where a fire had been lit, and the furniture was old and comfortable in the way furniture is when it has been used for years by the same person. He was in there when I found him, standing at the fireplace with a glass of something he hadn't touched, and I knocked on the open doorframe. He turned. He looked different, not undone. He was never undone, but the controlled professional surface was thinner than it had been, worn down by something, and underneath it was a face that was just his, just a man's face, with everything in it that he never let the surface show. "You should sleep," he said. "So should you," I said. I came into the room. I sat in the chair by the fire, the one that was clearly his, the one with the slight depression in the cushion of years. He looked at the chair. He looked at me in it. He sat in the other one. We were quiet for a long time. "Ferrara will move openly now," he said. "The abduction was escalation. After this, he has nothing left to lose. He paused. Which makes him more dangerous, not less. I know, I said. This doesn't end quietly. I know. Arya. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and looked at me directly. I need to tell you about my brother. I went still. The fire was warm. His voice was very even, which meant it was costing him. He was 17, Dante said, 8 years younger than me. I had been established in the family by then in ways that created enemies. He was, a pause, mine in the way that some people are yours, you know it early. He looked at the fire. Ferrara sent 3 men for me when I was 25. I chose to move against another family that night. I chose the strategic move. I left my brother in a location I believed was secure. He was quiet for a moment. It wasn't secure. I said nothing. I held very still. I told myself for a long time that it was the world's fault, he said. Then I told myself it was Ferrara's fault. Both of those were true. He looked at me. They were also easier than the true thing. The true thing, I said. I chose wrong. Simple, no decoration, no absolution sought. I have spent 15 years making sure I don't choose wrong again. And I have done it by not choosing, not allowing anything to be close enough to choose. He paused, until a woman walked through the wrong door and lit the candles. The fire, the room. His face in the firelight, stripped of all the surface machinery. I know about your father, he said. All of it. Giulio Conti he was not killed by my order. He was killed by Ferrara's. In a turf arrangement my father agreed to before I led this family. I inherited the history. He met my gaze. I cannot undo it. I will not insult you by pretending I can. I looked at him for a long time. I know, I said finally. You're not angry. I am angry, I said. I've been angry. I've also been sitting in a cold room for 6 hours knowing that the person coming through the door was going to be you. And I was right. I paused. I'll need more time with the anger. But I wanted to tell you I was right. Something in him broke, very quietly, in the way that things break that have been held against enormous pressure for a very long time. He didn't say anything. He reached out and turned my palm up on the arm of the chair, and he placed his hand over mine the way he'd held my wrist in the safe room. The same deliberate, conscious touch. We sat by the fire. Ferrara was still out there. One of us might not survive what came next. We held hands in the old comfortable room and neither of us said so. Chapter 10, The Final Violence, Last Battle. They fight as a unit. Ferrara's defeat, the cost named honestly. It ended on a Sunday. Not because the week had built toward it. Not in the satisfying narrative way that stories end on the day they were always going to end. It ended on a Sunday because Ferrara made a tactical error, and tactical He's fine, Marco said, not comedy for once, just directly, kindly looking at me across the kitchen. The boss is fine, Sal is fine, we lost 2 men. He paused. Good men. He set his fork down. He looked at the table for a moment. Ferrara is, another pause. It's over. I sat with that. He's on his way, Marco said. He looked up at me with an expression that was entirely unguarded. He called me from the car. He said, tell her it's over. I said, tell her yourself, and he said, tell her first. So, he spread his hands. It's over. Dante came in at 10:40. He had been cleaned up somewhere between the compound and Lincoln Park. New shirt, no visible injury. Though I could see from the way he was holding his left shoulder that there was something being ignored there. He came into the kitchen and stopped at the doorway. I had lit a second candle. He looked at both candles. He looked at me. It's over, he said. I know, I said. Marco told me. I paused. Sal told me. Also, I may have assisted with the location. He looked at me. Administrative access, I said. I retained it. I found the secondary property and I sent it to Sal. He said good girl, which I am choosing to take as a compliment. I paused. I'm sorry if that was, don't apologize, he said. He came into the kitchen. He sat at the island, not standing, not the careful managed posture of a man in control of his space. He sat heavily, like a man who had been standing for a very long time and had just been given permission to stop. I moved to stand across from him. The candles were between us. The kitchen was warm. "We lost 2 men," he said. "I know. Good men." He looked at the counter. "That doesn't resolve." "I don't want you to think that it resolves because the threat is gone." "It doesn't resolve," I agreed. He looked up at me. "You're not afraid of that." "I'm not afraid of grief," I said. "Grief is just love with nowhere to go. I've been carrying that for a long time." He held my gaze for a moment. Then he reached out across the counter and touched the candle, not the flame, not the wax, but the base of it with one finger, confirming it was real. The same way he'd held my wrist, the same gesture, the same quality of deliberate, conscious presence. "It's over," he said again. Not a weather report this time, something more like a door opening. Chapter 11, What Comes After War, Rebuilding. Her place chosen. A proposal with weight. The nickname fully warm. The weeks after were the strangest weeks of my life. Not because the danger was gone. The city restructured itself quietly around the absence of Ferrara, and the Salvetter family's position shifted. And there were meetings I was not part of, and conversations that did not include me. That world continued. It had its own metabolism, and I had learned to live alongside it without pretending I was inside it. The strangeness was the ordinary, the kitchen in the morning. His papers at 7:30, the candle, the newspapers folded with the same precision, left in the same place every day. Marco appearing at irregular intervals with evidence of a diet that was theoretically progressing and practically collapsing, and a phone that was receiving with increasing frequency. Messages from Gianna that he read with an expression he was not aware his face was making. "She invited me to her sister's wedding," he said, on a Tuesday in November, standing in my kitchen with a rice cracker he was not eating. "Marco," I said. "That's lovely. It's a family wedding," he said, as if this were a legal document requiring careful interpretation. "In Naples for 3 days." "Yes," I said. "That's what a wedding is." He looked at the rice cracker. She said, and I am quoting directly, "Marco, you've been talking about visiting Naples for years, and the food is better than anything you'll find on that miserable diet. So you might as well come." He put the cracker down. "That is not," he stopped. He started again. "She said the food would be better. She also invited you to her family's wedding," I said. He was quiet for a long moment. "I'm going to need a suit," he said. "You have 40 suits." "A new suit," he said. "A Naples suit." He left with the unmistakable quality of a man who had been waiting for a specific thing and was now unsure what to do with his hands. I watched him go and felt something warm and amused and real, the exact feeling his presence was designed to generate, and it landed every time. Lena came to the house in the 3rd week of November. Her wrist was in a brace still, her ribs healing. She arrived with the skeptical curiosity of someone who had heard a great deal about a place, and was now in it, and revising their assumptions in real time. I gave her the tour, the kitchen, the mural, she loved it, which I had known she would, the garden where the incident had happened, which now had better security cameras and a new lock on the rear gate that Dante had installed himself, a fact I had discovered from Sal and had not mentioned to either of them. She met Dante in the kitchen at 7:30. He was at the island with his papers. He stood when she entered, which I had not expected. He said, "Miss Rossi." "How is your wrist?" "Healing," she said, with the steady assessment she brought to everything. "Thank you for the security arrangements at my apartment." He nodded once. "Unnecessary to thank me. I'm thanking you anyway." She looked at him for a long moment, the comprehensive, taking stock look. Then she looked at me. And then she looked back at him and said, "She lights a candle everywhere she goes. Has since she was 8. It's not about lighting. It's about making whatever room she's in feel like somewhere she can stay." Dante was very still. "I thought you should know that," Lena said, "in case you were wondering." She left us in the kitchen. I heard her in the corridor asking Sal if there was espresso. I looked at the candle on my station. I looked at Dante. He was looking at me with the full, unmodified attention, and in it was everything: the 15 years, the brother, the wrong door, the safe room, the floor, my wrist in his hand, all of it. Present in that look, and available. "She's right," he said, "about the candle." "I know," I said. "You made this kitchen somewhere you could stay." "It was already a good kitchen," I said. "Aria," my name in his voice. Different from the first time, not cataloging, not containing. Warm, entirely warm. "I would like you to stay, not as the kitchen, not as the pastry contract. I would like," he paused. "I am asking you to stay." I looked at him across the kitchen. "I know what it costs," he said. "I will not pretend otherwise. I will not make it smaller than it is. My world does not become safe. It becomes," he searched for the word, "accountable. I will account for everything I ask of you." "That's not a proposal," I said. "No," he said. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and set something on the counter. Simple. A ring, not large, not theatrical. Something old, with a specific quality that meant it had belonged to someone before. This was my mother's. It has been in the East Wing for 15 years. I had Sal find it 2 weeks ago. He looked at it, then at me. "It's a proposal. It's simply not a fairy tale." I looked at the ring. I looked at him. "Little light," he said, and in his voice it was entirely different from the first time, not cold, not possessive, not observational. It was a name he had chosen. It was the most tender thing I had ever heard him say. "Yes," I said, "but I want to keep the kitchen." "The kitchen is yours," he said. "It was always yours." I picked up the ring. I held it for a moment, then I put it on. Outside, through the kitchen window, Marco appeared briefly in the rear garden, saw us through the glass, looked at the sky with an expression of complicated gratitude, and said something that was clearly not meant to be heard. I was fairly sure it was directed at God. I put it on, and the kitchen was warm, and the candle burned, and the morning was ordinary, and it was the most radical thing that had ever happened to me. Chapter 12, The Life They Built 6 Months Forward. Why her closed, sensory motif completed, the final quiet. 6 months. In the kitchen at 6 in the morning, flour on my wrist, the convection oven, Gerald, the same Gerald I had moved from West Randolph. And yes, Dante had the oven transported, and no. He did not mention it. It simply appeared one morning, running at the correct temperature for the morning pastries. The Lemon Grove mural had been replicated on the east-facing wall of the compound kitchen by the same artist, who accepted payment in cash and croissants and asked no questions that I could not comfortably answer. Some things about my life were the same. Most were not. I had a ring on my finger and a kitchen I had made entirely mine in a house that was still, on its edges, dangerous. I had learned the difference between the East Corridor at 2 p.m. and the East Corridor at 2 a.m., and what it meant. I had learned which cars meant what, which silences were administrative, and which were something to pay attention to. Which knocks on the kitchen door were Marco, and which were Sal, and which were Dante, who never knocked but always paused at the threshold long enough for me to know he was there. I had learned the shape of his world. I lived in it with open eyes. I was finishing the ganache on a Thursday morning when he appeared in the kitchen doorway, not at 7:30. Earlier, 6:15, which meant something had gotten him up before the papers. He was in a shirt, no jacket, the specific dishabille of a man who had been working and had not been interrupted by the need for professional armor. He looked at me. I looked at him. Something I was doing at the prep station. I don't know what it was, some small unconscious thing, some movement or expression made him stop. He looked at me the way he had looked at me on the very first night. Not threat, not hunger. Attention, the full weight of it unmodified. And then, because I was not at a strange table in a dining room full of armed men, because I was in my kitchen with my oven running and my ring on my finger, and 6 months of his world lived in full knowledge, I smiled at him. The same smile, the reflexive, unguarded, helpless smile that I gave to people I trusted. He made a sound, not a laugh, not quite, but the structural cousin of one. Something low and quiet and entirely private. "What?" I said. He crossed the kitchen. He came to stand beside the prep station, the way he had stood beside it on the morning with the cut on his arm, close enough that the warmth of him was present alongside the warmth of the oven. "You still do that," he said. "Do what?" "Smile at me." He said it with wonder almost, with the particular quality of someone who keeps encountering evidence of something they have not yet entirely understood. "Like I'm just a person." "You are just a person," I said. "Arya," his voice was very quiet, "in 6 months you have seen—" "I know what I've seen," I said. He was looking at me with the full attention, and in it, all of it, the whole accumulated weight of what we had been through. There was something that had not been there on the first night. Something settled, something that had arrived on the other side of everything it had cost and was still standing. "It still costs me the same," he said, "every time." The smile. He reached out and touched the base of the candle on my prep station. The same gesture, the same one finger, the same conscious, deliberate contact. "You lit every dark room I had," he said. "You walked in and you lit them." The candle burned between us. The kitchen was warm with Gerald's heat and morning light. I set down the pastry brush. I turned to face him completely. The first time in 6 months I had stopped working to face him with no task between us, and I think he felt the significance of it because he went very still. "Little light," he said, and it was everything that nickname had ever been and nothing that it started as. It was a history. It was an arrival. It was his voice, saying the thing he had been building toward since a woman walked through the wrong door and lit the candles in his dining room and smiled at him like he was someone she was glad to see. "Still here," I said. "Still here," he agreed. He kissed me in the kitchen while Gerald ran and the candle burned and the morning made itself ordinary around us. Later that morning, Marco arrived at 9 with the expression of a man undergoing a profound personal evolution. He sat at the counter. He placed his phone face down. He looked at the ceiling. "She made me eat a full breakfast in Naples," he said. "With bread and dessert." He paused. "I told her it was against my diet, and she said, 'Marco, the diet is a punishment you invented for yourself.' And I said, 'Gianna, it is medically prescribed.' And she said, 'Marco, doctor. Rixai is your cousin, and he prescribed it because you bet him 20 euros you couldn't last a week.'" He was quiet. "She was right. I did bet him 20 euros. Another pause. "She is always right. Marco," I said, "how was Naples?" He looked at me. Something shifted in his face, the comedy underneath it, the genuine warmth underneath that, and something else entirely underneath that. "She wore a blue dress," he said, very quietly. And I was observant. I said nothing. I let him have it. He sat with it for a long moment. Then he picked up a biscotti I had not offered and ate it with the expression of a man who has finally, after many years of complicated effort, arrived somewhere he wanted to be. The kitchen was ordinary that morning. The candle burned on the corner of the prep station, one small flame, one particular quality of warm light. The habit that had begun in my mother's house and had traveled with me through every kitchen I'd ever worked in and had arrived here and stayed. Dante was at the island at 7:30 with his 3 newspapers, folded in the precise way that told me he had been doing it since he was young and had never stopped. His shoulder, the left one from the battle, had healed cleanly. His hands were still on the table. He looked up when I brought his coffee. He looked at me the way he always looked at me now, with the full, unmodified weight of it, and the warmth underneath. And under that, always, the knowledge of everything we had carried to get here. I set the coffee down. I went back to my station. The kitchen was warm and Gerald hummed, and the morning came through the east-facing window onto the Lemon Grove mural, and the world was not safe, and we had chosen it, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was the most ordinary, extraordinary life I could imagine. One unresolved question I carry was choosing to love him, knowing the cost, knowing the history,